In the fading light of Imladris, where the waters of Bruinen sang their eternal song, Elrohir stood upon the great terrace of his father's house. The autumn winds carried whispers of old sorrows, and in his heart stirred a grief that had long lain dormant. For 700 years had passed since the fall of Gondolin, that most fair of the hidden cities of the Noldor, yet still did its memory burn like a star in the darkness of ages past. "My lord," came a voice behind him, soft as the evening breeze. Glorfindel approached, his golden hair catching the last rays of a Nor. "You seem troubled this eve. What weighs upon your spirit?" Elrohir turned, and in his gray eyes lay depths of sorrow that even the Balrog Slayer had seldom witnessed. "I have received word from the Grey Havens, old friend. A ship prepares to sail, and among its passengers, she who was lost to us in Gondolin's fall has been found." The words struck Glorfindel like a blow from Grond itself. His face, fair as the morning, grew pale as moonlight. "Of whom do you speak? All who dwelt in the hidden city are long accounted for, whether among the living or the dead." "Nay," Elrohir whispered, his voice barely audible above the rushing waters. "Not all. There was one, Mithrelas the Fair, daughter of Gil-galad's house, keeper of the flame imperishable in Gondolin's heart. When Gothmog's host breached the outer gates, she vanished like morning mist. Some said she perished in the flames, others whispered she fled into the secret ways. But now," he drew forth a letter sealed with the mark of Círdan the shipwright. "Now comes word that her tomb has been discovered in the ruins, and with it, a tale that shall shake the very foundations of what we believed true." Glorfindel's hand moved instinctively to where once Orcrist had hung at his side. What manner of tale could disturb the peace of Rivendell so? "Speak plainly, son of Elrond." The message is cryptic, yet clear enough to those who know the old tongue. "They buried her in Gondolin, but she was not dead. The sleeper wakes, and the oath long dormant stirred. More than this, Círdan would not commit to parchment." Elrohir's voice grew heavy with foreboding. "I fear some shadow of the past has stirred, and we who thought ourselves free of the burdens of the elder days must take up arms once more." As if summoned by their words, Elrond Half-Elven appeared upon the terrace, his presence bringing with it the weight of ages and the wisdom of the wise. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, fixed upon his son with concern. "I have felt the tremor in the music," Elrond said softly. "Something long sleeping has awakened. The very stones of Imladris sing of disturbance in the old places. What news from the Grey Havens troubles you so?" Elrohir handed his father the letter, and as Elrond read, his face grew grave indeed. When at last he looked up, starlight seemed to dance in his eyes, though whether with hope or fear, none could say. "Mithrelas lives," Elrond breathed. "She who bore the last secret of Gil-galad, who knew the final words of the High King before his death upon the slopes of Mount Doom. If she has indeed awakened from whatever sleep held her these many centuries, then the time of hidden things is ending. We must ride for the havens with all speed." "But my lord," Glorfindel interjected, "what of the secret she bore? What words of Gil-galad could be of such import now, when Sauron is defeated and the age of men has begun?" Elrond's gaze turned eastward toward the distant peaks of the Misty Mountain, and beyond them to lands shrouded in shadow and mystery. "There are older powers than Sauron, my friend, older oaths and deeper magic that sleep beneath the roots of the world." Gil-galad knew something in his final hours, something he dared not speak, save to one he trusted above all others. If Mithrelas bears those words still, then perhaps the victory we thought complete is but the first movement in a longer song. The three elves stood in silence as night deepened around them, each lost in thoughts of the past and fears for the future. Far below, the river sang its endless song, but to their keen ears it seemed changed, as if it too had learned of the awakening and sang now not of peace, but of journeys yet to come. "When do we ride?" asked Elrohir at last. "At first light," Elrond replied, "and we ride not as lords of Imladris, but as those who remember the elder days and are bound still by oaths sworn in Valinor's light. For if Mithrelus wakes, then the time of the last alliance is not ended, but transformed into something we have yet to understand. As dawn broke over the misty mountains, 3 figures rode out from Rivendell upon horses swift as the wind, their faces set toward the western sea, and whatever truth awaited them there. The salt wind carried more than the scent of the sea when Elrond, Elrohir, and Glorfindel arrived at Mithlond after 5 days of hard riding. It bore with it an unease that settled upon the gray havens like a mantle of shadow, despite the bright autumn sun that danced upon the waves. Círdan the shipwright awaited them at the harbor's edge, his ancient face grave beneath his gray hood. Behind him stood several figures cloaked against the wind, their faces hidden in shadow. One among them seemed to shimmer with a light that was not of the sun, and at her presence the very air grew thick with the weight of years unnumbered. Lord Elrond, Círdan spoke, his voice deep as the ocean's depth. You have come swiftly. That is well, for time grows short, and the tides themselves speak of change. Where is she? Elrohir asked, his eyes searching among the cloaked figures. Where is Mithrelus the Fair? The figure that shimmered stepped forward and lowered her hood, revealing a face of such beauty that it seemed wrought of starlight and silver. Her hair fell like a waterfall of moonbeams, and her eyes held depths that spoke of sorrows beyond measure. Yet there was something strange about her bearing, as if she moved through the world without quite touching it, like one who walks in dream. I am here, son of Elrond, she said, and her voice was like music heard in the spaces between heartbeats. Though whether I am truly she you remember, I cannot say. 700 years I have dwelt in the spaces between life and death, held fast by an oath I dared not break, even in the face of Gondolin's doom. Glorfindel stepped forward, his hand upon his sword hilt. You speak in riddles, lady. If you are indeed Mithrelus, then tell us, what words did Gil-galad speak to you in his final hour? What secret did he entrust to your keeping that could not die even with Gondolin's fall? A shadow passed across Mithrelus's fair face, and for a moment she seemed to flicker, as if she were but a reflection upon troubled water. He spoke of the 9, she whispered. Not the Nazgul, as you might think, but the 9 who came before. The 9 heirs of Isildur's line, who would rise in the world's darkest hour, when hope is but a dying ember, said he, and the strength of men fails utterly. Then shall the 9 arise from their hidden places and restore what was lost. Elrond's face grew pale as winter frost. Impossible. Isildur had but 2 sons who survived to adulthood, and their lineage is well known to us. There are no 9 heirs hidden in shadow. Are there not? The Mithrelus's smile was sad as autumn leaves. Think you that Gil-galad spoke of sons born in the common way? Nay, Lord of Rivendell. The 9 were forged by arts both fair and fell, wrought in the smithies of Numenor before its fall, when the blood of kings ran thick with the power of the Valar themselves. Isildur did not merely father children of his flesh, but heirs of his spirit, bound to his will by chains of gold and adamant. Círdan spoke then, his voice heavy with portent. 3 days past, we discovered her tomb beneath the roots of Tanicatil's echo, where the refugees of Gondolin built their final sanctuary. The chamber was wrought of mithril and sealed with words of power that even I could barely read. Within lay not bone, but she herself, sleeping the sleep of the waiting. Her hand clutched about a crystal that burned with inner fire. The Palantir of Gil-galad, breathed Glorfindel, lost when he fell upon the slopes of Mount Doom. Lost to you, perhaps, Mithrelus said, but not to those who knew where to look. The High King foresaw his doom and made provision. Through the Seeing Stone, he scattered his essence across the years, and from that essence came the 9, not children of his body, but inheritors of his will and purpose. Elrond stepped closer, his eyes searching Mithrelus's face for any sign of deception. If this tale is true, then where are these 9? Why have they not revealed themselves in all the long years since Gil-galad's passing? Because, Mithrelus replied, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, They were not meant to wake until the final test came upon Middle-earth. The war with Sauron was but the prelude, Lord Elrond. The true darkness has yet to show its face. As if her words had summoned it, a shadow fell across the harbor, despite the clear sky above. The very air grew cold, and from the depths of the sea came a sound like the groaning of great stones beneath impossible weight. The waves, which had been gentle, began to rise and foam, and in their depths something vast stirred. "It begins," Mithrellis said, and her form began to glow with silver light. "The sleepers wake, and with them comes the final choice. Will Middle-earth stand as one, or fall divided into the darkness that comes after the ending of all things?" Before any could answer, the sea erupted in a geyser of dark water, and from its depths rose a sight that filled even the stout-hearted with terror. A ship of black glass and burning shadow breached the waves, its sails billowing with winds from beyond the void. Upon its deck stood figures wreathed in darkness, and at their head a form that might once have been fair, but was now terrible beyond measure. "The heralds of the last dark," Círdan breathed, his face white with fear. "I had hoped never to see their like again." The black ship turned toward the harbor, and as it approached, the very stones of the Grey Havens began to crack and crumble. But Mithrellis raised her hand, and the crystal she held blazed forth with light that drove back the shadows, if only for a moment. "Now comes the test," she said, her voice ringing like silver bells across the water. "Now we shall see if the Nine are ready to claim their inheritance, or if Middle-earth shall fall to the power that was old when Morgoth was yet young." The battle for the Grey Havens was about to begin, and with it, the last chapter of the Elder Days. As the black ship drew near to Mithlond's ancient piers, the very foundations of the Grey Havens shuddered. Yet, even as darkness pressed close about them, a wonder manifested that none present could have foreseen. The crystal in Mithrellis's hand blazed forth with light beyond that of Arundel's star, and from that radiance came 9 beams that shot forth like arrows across the breadth of Middle-earth. "Behold!" she cried, her voice carrying over the tumult of the waves. "The signal is sent. Let the heirs of Isildur's spirit awaken to their destiny." Far to the south, in the abandoned halls beneath Minas Tirith, a figure stirred in chambers long thought empty. Farandir the Tall, as he had been known in the Elder Days, opened eyes that blazed with silver fire. For 7 centuries he had waited, sustained by the will of Gil-galad and the power bound within his very bone. Now the call had come, and he rose from his vigil, gathering unto himself the great blade Narsil reforged, not Andúril as men knew it, but its true twin, wrought in secret by the smiths of Númenor. In the frozen wastes beyond Forochel, another stirred, Malbeth the seer, she who had spoken prophecies in the days of Elendil, stepped forth from a cave of ice that had been her sanctuary through the long years. About her shoulders fell a cloak woven of starlight, and in her eyes burned the knowledge of things that were and are and yet might come to pass. From the depths of Moria itself came a third awakening. Where once the Balrog had held dominion, now Telchar's heir arose, Celebdil, the smith, who had wrought weapons for kings in ages past. The darkness fled before his hammer's light as he ascended from the deep places, bearing with him treasures that had lain hidden since the fall of Khazad-dûm. One by one, across the width and breadth of Middle-earth, the 9 arose from their long slumber. From the Shire came Bandobras the Bold, not the hobbit of legend, but one who had taken that form to watch over the halflings in their greatest need. From Lothlorien emerged Galdor the Tall, keeper of the Golden Wood's deepest secrets. The dead marshes yielded up Herion the Lost, who had dwelt among the phantoms of the ancient dead. From distant Harad came Sulion of the South, whose skin was dark as night, but whose heart burned with the fire of Númenor. The Grey Mountains gave up Dine Ironarm, not the dwarf lord of that name, but one who had worn that guise to unite the scattered clan. And from Isengard itself, from the very tower where Saruman had worked his treacheries, came the ninth and strangest of all, Kurunir the White, he who had been corrupted in form, but whose spirit had been kept pure through Gilgalad's art, now cleansed and restored to his original purpose. As each awakened, they felt the pull of the crystal's light and began their journey toward the Grey Haven. Yet they would not arrive as simple travelers, for with their awakening came a change in the very nature of Middle-earth itself. The straight road that led to the Undying Lands began to bend and curve, creating paths through air and stone that had not existed moments before. The very fabric of Arda trembled as powers long dormant stirred to life. Meanwhile, at Mithlond, the battle had begun in earnest. The Black Ship's crew had disembarked, and they were beings such as had not been seen since the music of the Ainur was first sung. They were discordant, entities born from the spaces between the notes of Eru's song, creatures of pure negation that sought to unmake all that was made. Círdan fought with a sword of blue flame, its blade singing as it clove through shadow flesh. Glorfindel wielded Glamdring with terrible purpose, its light blazing like a star in the darkness. Yet for all their valor, the defenders were being pressed back toward the sea. "They are too many," Elrohir called out, as he parried a blow from a discordant's void blade. Even the light of Arundel could not drive back such darkness. It was then that the first of the nine arrived. Barandir the Tall stepped through the air itself, as if it were a doorway, appearing in the center of the battle with Narsil's twin held high. Where his blade struck, the discordants did not merely fall, they ceased, as if they had never been at all. "Stand fast, defenders of the light," his voice rang out like a trumpet call. "The hour of the nine has come." One by one, the others manifested upon the harbor. Malbeth the Seer spoke words in the old tongue, and the very stones of Mithlond rose up to form a barrier against the dark tide. Celebdil the Smith hammered the air itself, forging weapons of pure light for those who had none. Bandobras laughed as he fought, and his laughter was like sunlight breaking through storm cloud. But it was the arrival of the ninth that turned the tide completely. When Kurunir the White stepped forth, the discordants recoiled in horror, for they recognized in him something they had thought impossible, one of their own kind who had chosen creation over destruction, harmony over discord. "You were made to unmake," their leader spoke, its voice like the grinding of cosmic gears. "How can you stand with those who would preserve what should be ended?" Kurunir smiled, and his smile was terrible and beautiful at once. "Because," he said softly, "I learned that in choosing to preserve what is good, one becomes more than what one was made to be. You could learn this too, if you chose." The discordant leader raised its blade, but Kurunir did not draw a weapon. Instead, he began to sing, not words, but pure music that harmonized with the song of creation itself. The other 8 took up the melody, each adding their voice to the growing symphony. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the forces of discord. The Black Ship began to dissolve, its crew screaming as they were pulled back into the void from whence they came. The leader of the discordants made one last desperate attempt to strike down Kurunir, but its blade passed through him as if he were made of light and air. "We will return," it hissed as it too began to fade. "When the last music ends, we will return to claim what was always ours." "Perhaps," Kurunir replied gently, "but until that day, we shall stand guard." As silence fell over the Grey Havens, Mithrellis lowered the crystal and turned to face the nine. Her eyes were filled with pride and sorrow in equal measure. "It is done," she said softly. "The first test is passed, but there will be others, and not all will be so easily won. The question now is this: will you remain as guardians of Middle-earth, or will you pass into the West, as was your original design?" The nine looked to one another, then to the assembled defenders, and finally to the sea that stretched endlessly toward the Undying Land. Their choice would shape the destiny of all who dwelt in Middle-earth, but for now, they were content to watch the sun set over waters that had grown calm once more. In the great hall of the Grey Haven, which had been swiftly restored by arts both ancient and new, there gathered such a council as had not been seen since the last alliance. The 9 heirs sat in a circle of silver chairs wrought by Celebdil's hammer, while about them stood the lords and ladies of the Eldar. Mithrellas occupied a throne of crystal at their head, the Palantir of Gil-galad resting in her lap like a captive star. "The immediate threat has passed," spoke Elrond, his voice heavy with the weight of new knowledge. "Yet I fear this was but the first movement of a longer song. If discordants walk again in Middle-earth, then some power greater than we have yet imagined has stirred in the deep places of the world." Malbeth the seer raised her hood, revealing eyes that swirled with visions of things yet to come. "I have looked upon the threads of fate, Lord of Rivendell, and I see darkness gathering not from without, but from within. There is a corruption spreading through the very roots of Arda, older than Morgoth's malice, deeper than Sauron's cunning." "Speak plainly," rumbled Dain Ironarm, his voice like the grinding of stone. "We are not elves to dance about with riddles when plain words would serve." The seer's smile was sad as winter rain. "Very well, Master Dwarf. In the beginning, when Eru Ilúvatar first conceived the music of creation, there were themes that he rejected, not because they were evil, as Melkor's discord proved to be, but because they were incomplete. These themes he cast into the void, thinking them safely imprisoned beyond the circles of the world." Curanir the White leaned forward, his eyes bright with understanding. "But the void is not empty, is it? It is filled with the weight of things that might have been, pressing always against the barriers that hold them back." "Just so," Mithrellas confirmed, her fingers tracing patterns on the Palantir's surface. "And now, in this age, when the Valar have withdrawn their direct influence and the power of the rings has ended, those barriers grow thin. The unmaking songs seek to enter our world and complete themselves, even if it means destroying all that exists to make room for their own theme." Glorfindel struck his fist upon the arm of his chair. "Then we must strengthen the barrier. Surely the combined might of the 9, guided by the wisdom of the Eldar, can stand against any threat from the void." "Would that it were so simple," sighed Bandobras, his usually merry countenance grave. "But I have walked the borders between the seen and unseen for 7 centuries, and I tell you truly, the problem is not one of force, but of foundation. The very structure of reality in Middle-earth is changing. The Fourth Age was meant to be the age of men, but with our awakening, we have introduced elements that belong to no single age." Harayon the Lost spoke then, his voice like wind through empty halls. "I have dwelt among the dead for longer than I care to remember, and I have seen the damage our awakening has wrought. Spirits that were at rest now stir in their graves. The paths between life and death grow tangled. We are disrupting the natural order simply by existing." A long silence fell upon the council, broken at last by Sulion of the South. "Then what would you have us do? Return to our long sleep and let Middle-earth face the unmaking alone? No," Mithrellas said firmly, rising from her crystal throne. "Gil-galad foresaw this dilemma when he wrought you from the essence of his will. The disruption you cause by existing is real, but it serves a purpose. You are not merely guardians, you are anchors, points of stability in a reality that threatens to come undone." She gestured to the Palantir, and within its depths, images began to form. They saw Middle-earth as it truly was, not the green and pleasant lands that mortal eyes perceived, but a web of forces held in delicate balance. They saw the places where that balance was failing, the gaps in reality spreading out from the ruins of Númenor, the cracks in the world's foundation beneath Mount Doom, the spreading void where Angband once stood. "Each of you was positioned to watch over one of these weak points," she continued. "Your very presence holds the fabric of reality together, preventing the unmaking songs from taking root. But the cost..." Her voice trailed off as she touched the Palantir once more, and they all saw what she saw, the slow but inexorable drain upon their own essences, the price of serving as living buttresses for a crumbling world. "How long?" asked Telchar's heir, his smith's eyes calculating the rate of decay. "How long can we maintain this vigil before we burn out entirely?" "Perhaps 1,000 years," Mithrellas replied, perhaps less. The strain grows greater with each passing day. Círdan, who had remained silent throughout the council, now stood and spoke. There may be another way. In the depths of Valinor lie the Silmarils of Feanor, or rather, the one Silmaril that remains upon the earth, embedded in the prow of Arundel's ship. If it could be brought to Middle-earth, the Valar would never permit it, Elrond interrupted. The Silmaril are beyond the reach of those who dwell in the mortal lands. Are they? Curanir smiled mysteriously. I am not what I once was, nor am I bound by the same laws that govern the Maiar in their original form. The way to Valinor is barred to the living, but I am something between life and death, order and chaos, perhaps. Before he could finish his thought, a new voice rang out across the hall, young and clear and full of desperate hope. My lords and lady, forgive the intrusion, but there is news that cannot wait. All eyes turned to see a young man standing in the doorway, travel-stained and weary, his clothes marking him as one of the Dunedain. Behind him stood two companions, an elf maid of Lothlorien and a dwarf bearing the marks of Erebor's finest craftsmanship. I am Tel-Contar of the North, the young man continued, advancing into the hall with a mixture of reverence and urgency. Heir to the blood of Isildur, in the mortal line, I bring word from Minas Tirith, where strange lights have been seen in the sky, and the Palantir of Anor has awakened of its own accord. Mithrellas's eyes widened with sudden understanding. Show me, she commanded, extending the Palantir of Gil-galad toward the newcomer. As Tel-Contar placed his hands upon the seeing stone, its light blazed forth with unprecedented brilliance. Within its depths, all present could see the vision that had driven the young heir to seek them out with such urgency. Above the White City, a great rift had opened in the very sky itself. Through that rift came not darkness, but a terrible light, the light of creation itself, raw and untempered by the wisdom that had shaped it into the familiar world they knew. And reaching through that rift were hands of silver fire, seeking to grasp something that lay hidden in the depths of Minas Tirith. The Elisar, breathed Elrond. Aragorn's stone of healing. It was never just a tool of restoration. It was a key. A key to what? Demanded Glorfindel. Mithrellas's face had gone pale as starlight. To the original music, she whispered. To the first theme Eru sang when he conceived Middle-earth. If the unmaking songs can corrupt or control it. She did not need to finish. They all understood. The battle for the Grey Havens had been nothing compared to what was coming. The true test of the Nine and of Middle-earth itself was about to begin. The journey from the Grey Havens to Minas Tirith took place not upon the roads of Middle-earth, but through paths that existed between one heartbeat and the next. The Nine had learned to step through the spaces in reality itself, and though such travel was costly to their already strained essences, time had become their most precious resource. They arrived upon the Pelennor fields as dawn broke over the White City, but it was a dawn unlike any that had blessed Gondor in the days of its glory. The sky above Minas Tirith writhed with unnatural light, and the great rift that Tel-Contar had shown them in the Palantir now stretched from horizon to horizon, a wound in the very heavens that bled silver fire. King Elisar stood upon the walls of the citadel, his weathered face grave as he watched the approaching figure. Beside him stood Queen Arwen, her elven sight piercing deeper than mortal eyes into the nature of the catastrophe unfolding above them. The Elisar stone responds to their presence, she murmured to her husband, gesturing to where the great jewel hung upon his breast. Even from this distance, they could see it pulsing with green light in rhythm with the footsteps of the Nine. Is that good or ill? Aragorn asked, his hand instinctively moving to Andúral's hilt. I know not, Arwen replied, but I fear we shall learn soon enough. As the Nine approached the great gate, the very stones of Minas Tirith began to sing, not with voices, but with harmonies that resonated through the foundations of the city and up into its highest towers. Windows shattered, not from violence, but from the sheer beauty of the sound. Citizens poured from their homes, many weeping without knowing why, all drawn by something greater than curiosity to witness what was unfolding. Borondir the Tall strode at the head of the nine, his twin of Narsil gleaming in the strange light. As he passed beneath the gate, the ancient words carved there blazed forth with silver fire. Et erelo endorena utulien. I have come from the great sea to Middle-earth. But now those words seemed to carry new meaning, as if they spoke not of Elendel's arrival, but of something far greater coming to pass. Lord Elisar, Borondir spoke, his voice carrying the weight of ages. We come not as conquerors or kings, but as those bound by oath to stand against the unmaking. Will you permit us entry to your city? Aragorn descended from the walls to meet them, and as he drew near, the Elisar upon his breast blazed forth with such radiance that all present were forced to shield their eyes. When the light faded, they saw that the king of Gondor had changed. His face held now the same ageless quality as the nine, and his eyes burned with silver fire. The choice is made, he said softly, though his voice carried to every corner of the courtyard. I am the 10th. No, Mithrellis stepped forward, her crystal palantir pulsing with urgent light. You were never meant to be one of us, Aragorn, son of Arathorn. Your path lies elsewhere, though it runs parallel to ours for this brief span of time. She gestured toward the rift in the sky, and as she did so, shapes began to emerge from that terrible brightness, not the discordance they had faced before, but beings of pure creative force, entities that had been present the first speaking of Eru's theme. Behold the symphonists, she continued. They come not to destroy, but to remake, to impose their own vision of what Middle-earth should be upon what it has become. They see the corruption spreading through reality's foundation and believe the only solution is to tear it down, begin anew. One of the beings descended toward them, its form shifting between music made visible and light given substance. When it spoke, its voice was like the sound of stars being born. Children of the marred music, it said, and though its words were beautiful, they carried within them the promise of absolute ending. You cling to forms that are flawed, to a reality built upon Melkor's discord. We offer you perfection, the chance to be remade in harmony with the original theme. Curunir the White stepped forward to answer, and as he did, his form began to shine with its own inner light. We are flawed, yes. We are marred by the discord that entered the music at its first singing. But in our flaws lie our strength, the ability to choose, to grow, to become more than we were made to be. Choice is chaos, the symphonist replied. Growth is deviation from perfect design. You speak of strength, but what you describe is weakness, the inability to accept the harmony that was intended. It was then that a new voice joined the debate, aged and wise and filled with gentle authority. Gandalf the White stepped forth from the shadows of the gate, his staff blazing with light that seemed to come from the very heart of creation. Old friends, he said, addressing both the nine and the symphonist with equal courtesy. I have watched this confrontation building for many years, and I come now not as Mithrandir the Grey, nor as Gandalf the White, but as Olorin, servant of Manwë, and student of Nienna's wisdom. The symphonist turned its attention to the wizard, and in its shifting form, something like surprise manifested. Olorin, you have dwelt too long in the marred lands. Your music has become tainted with their discord. Return with us to Valinor, and let us cleanse you of this corruption. Gandalf smiled, and his smile was like sunrise after the longest night. I thank you for the offer, but I must decline. I have indeed been changed by my time in Middle-earth, but that change has taught me something that perhaps was not apparent when the music was first sung. He gestured to the assembled crowd, men and elves, the 9 heirs and the citizens of Minas Tirith, all standing together in the strange light of the rift. Perfection is not harmony, my ancient friend. Perfection is the ability to find harmony within discord, to create beauty from brokenness, to sing new themes that were never part of the original design, but which arise naturally from the interplay of choice and consequence. The symphonist's form rippled with what might have been confusion. You speak of things that should not be. The music was complete when first it was sung. Nothing new can be added without destroying the whole. And yet, Gandalf replied gently, here we stand, proof that new things can indeed arise. The friendship between Legolas and Gimli was not written in any theme, yet it has enriched the music immeasurably. The courage of the hobbits was not foreseen, yet it saved all that was precious. Even the redemption of Curanir here beside us, surely that was not part of the original design. As if summoned by his words, other figures began to manifest around them. From the houses of Minas Tirith came those who had fought in the War of the Ring, Legolas and Gimli, Merry and Pippin, Faramir and Éowyn. From the very air materialized the spirits of those who had passed beyond, Boromir and Theoden, Haldir and Denethor, all drawn by the power that was gathering in this place. But most wondrous of all, from the light of the rift itself, stepped a figure that made even the Nine bow their heads in reverence. Gil-galad the High King walked among them once more, but not as he had been in life. His form was woven of starlight and memory, and in his eyes burned the wisdom of one who had looked upon the music from both within and without. My faithful Mithrelus, he spoke, his voice like silver bells across water. Well have you kept the trust I placed in you. And my 9 heirs, you have proven yourselves worthy of the essence I shared with you. But the time has come for me to speak truths that I dared not utter while I lived. He turned to face the symphonist, and when he spoke, his words carried the authority of one who had stood in the presence of the Valor themselves. You seek to remake what you consider flawed, but you do not understand the nature of the flaw. Melkor's discord was not an error. It was a necessary component of a music too vast for any single mind to comprehend. Eru Ilúvatar knew that discord would enter his song, and he allowed it not from weakness, but from wisdom, for only through the interplay of order and chaos, harmony and discord, could true complexity arise. The symphonist's form began to pulse with agitation. Blasphemy! You speak as one corrupted by the very discord you defend. Do I? Gil-galad smiled, and in that smile was both sorrow and joy intermingled. Then let me show you what I learned in the moment of my death, when I stood with Elendil upon the slopes of Mount Doom and felt my spirit departing this world. He raised his hand, and from it came a light that was neither gold nor silver, but something altogether new, a radiance born from the marriage of order and chaos, a harmony that embraced discord as a partner rather than an enemy. I saw the true shape of the music, he continued, and I understood at last why Eru smiled when Melkor thought he had corrupted the song. The discord was not corruption, it was variation. And from variation comes growth, change, the possibility of becoming something greater than what was originally conceived. Diti, the light from his hand began to spread, touching each person present. And as it did, they all began to see what Gil-galad had seen. The music of creation was not a single, perfect song, but an infinite symphony with countless movements, each building upon what came before, while adding something entirely new. The themes that Eru had originally rejected were not flawed. They were simply waiting for the right time and context to be introduced. The unmaking songs you fear, Cisa Gil-galad addressed the symphonist directly, are not seeking to destroy the music. They are seeking to join it, to add their own voices to the ever-growing complexity of creation. But they do not know how to harmonize with what already exists. That is where we come in, not as guardians holding back change, but as teachers helping new themes find their place in the greater song. The rift in the sky began to pulse in rhythm with Gil-galad's words, and through it came not just the symphonist, but other entities as well. The unmaking songs themselves, revealed now not as destructive forces, but as unfinished melodies seeking completion. Mithrelas stepped forward, the palantir in her hands blazing with renewed purpose. Then this is why you made the 9, she said, with sudden understanding, not to preserve the old music unchanged, but to help it grow and evolve. We are not anchors, we are conductors. Just so, Gil-galad replied, Each of you embodies a different aspect of the harmony that can exist between order and chaos. Orondir represents the strength that comes from accepting change. Malbeth shows how prophecy and possibility can coexist. Kuranir proves that redemption is always possible, no matter how far one has fallen. As he spoke, the nine began to glow with their own inner light, and that light reached out to touch the confused melodies that poured through the rift. Where the lights met, new harmonies began to form. Complex, strange, beautiful beyond mortal comprehension. But even as this wonder unfolded, a shadow fell across the gathering. From the depths of the earth itself came a rumbling that spoke of powers older and darker than any they had yet faced. "The Deep Ones stir," whispered Harion the Lost, his connection to the realm of the dead allowing him to sense what others could not. The entities that were bound beneath the roots of the world in the elder days, they feel the music changing, and they seek to claim their part in it. Gil-galad's expression grew grave. Then the final test approaches. For while it is true that all themes can find their place in the greater music, some require careful guidance to prevent them from overwhelming the whole. The Deep Ones were bound not because they were evil, but because they were too powerful, too alien, too different from everything else that existed. The ground beneath Minas Tirith began to crack, and from those cracks seeped a darkness that was older than shadow, a presence that had slumbered since the foundations of Arda were laid. "What would you have us do?" asked Aragorn, his hand tight upon the Elisar. Gil-galad looked upon them all, the nine, the heroes of the War of the Ring, the spirits of the dead, the symphonists, and the unmaking songs, and in his eyes was both hope and trepidation. "We must go down," he said simply, "down into the deep places where the oldest melodies wait to be awakened. And there, in the darkness beneath the world, we must find a way to weave together all the themes of creation, the beautiful and the terrible, the harmonious and the discordant, the known and the unknowable, into something that has never existed before, a music that truly encompasses all possibilities." The greatest adventure of their lives was about to begin. The entrance to the paths of the Deep Ones was not found in any map or lore of Middle-earth, for it existed in a place between spaces, accessible only when the music itself grew strong enough to thin the barriers between what was and what might be. Gil-galad led them through a doorway of starlight that opened in the deepest cellars of Minas Tirith, past the foundations laid by Isildur himself. As they descended, the very nature of reality began to change around them. The stone walls gave way to crystalline formations that sang with their own inner voices, and the air itself became thick with possibility. Currents of might have been flowing like underground rivers through caverns carved from the substance of dreams. "Stay close," warned Malbeth the seer, her prophetic sight reaching ahead into the darkness. "The paths here shift with every thought, every emotion. To become lost in these depths is to become unmoored from existence itself." Behind them walked the strangest company ever assembled in the long history of Arda. The nine heirs of Gil-galad moved with purpose born of ancient design, while the symphonists flowed like liquid music given form. The heroes of the War of the Ring bore weapons that gleamed with more than earthly light, and the spirits of the honored dead whispered guidance from realms beyond mortal understanding. At their heart walked Mithrelas, the palantir of Gil-galad, pulsing with rhythm that matched the great heartbeat echoing up from the depths below. For there was indeed a heartbeat in the deep places, slow and vast and patient as the turning of ages, the pulse of something that had been dreaming since before the first word of the music was sung. "What manner of being could slumber so long?" whispered Pippin, his hobbit sense overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they approached. "Not a being," replied Gil-galad softly, "but a theme, the first theme that Eru conceived but never spoke, holding it in reserve until the music had grown complex enough to contain it. It is the theme of synthesis, the harmony that can bind together all other melodies into a single, unified song." They had been walking for hours through passages that defied geometry when Celebdil the smith suddenly raised his hand for silence. "The hammering has stopped," he said in wonder. Indeed, the rhythmic pounding that had echoed through the deep places since the first forging of metal had ceased. In its absence, they could hear something else, a singing that seemed to come from the very walls around them, as if the stone itself had found its voice. "We are close," breathed Kuranir, his form beginning to shimmer with anticipation. "I can feel it, the convergence point where all the rejected themes have gathered, waiting for their chance to join the greater song." Certain, the passage opened suddenly into a vast cavern whose size dwarfed even the halls of Khazad-dûm. Its walls were not of stone, but of crystallized music, surfaces that reflected not images but sounds, creating a symphony of echoes that spoke of every song ever sung and every melody yet to be conceived. At the center of the cavern lay a pool of liquid starlight, its surface perfectly still, despite the immense forces swirling beneath. Around the pool stood 12 thrones carved from single gems of impossible size, emerald and sapphire, ruby and diamond, and stones for which there were no names in any tongue of Middle-earth. The seats of the fundamental theme, Gil-galad named them with reverence. Here sat the first 12 melodies, when Eru taught them to harmonize with one another. But see, one throne stands empty. Indeed, the 13th throne, carved from what appeared to be crystallized shadow, bore no occupant. Yet as they watched, a figure began to materialize upon it, not solid like themselves, but woven from the very substance of unsung music. "Welcome," the figure spoke, and its voice was like the sound of potential itself given utterance. "I am the theme that was not. The melody held back until the song grew rich enough to bear my voice. I have waited through all the ages of the world for this moment when the music becomes complete." Aragorn stepped forward, the Elisar upon his breast blazing with response to the entity's presence. "What would you have of us? We come seeking harmony, not dominion. I ask nothing but the chance to sing," the theme replied. "But my voice, long silent, has grown strange in the darkness. I fear that when I join the music, my melody may overwhelm all others, reducing the symphony to a single, endless note." It was then that Mithrellis understood the true purpose of their gathering. "You need guides," she said with sudden insight, "voices to sing alongside yours, to help you find your place in the greater harmony without drowning out what has come before." "Just so," the theme confirmed, "but the cost of such guidance is great. Those who sing with me must surrender their individual melody, allowing them to be woven into mine until we become something new. Neither what I was, nor what you were, but a synthesis of all possibility." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the gentle lapping of starlight against the shores of the pool. Each member of the company wrestled with the implications of what was being asked: to lose their individual identities, to become part of something greater but fundamentally different from what they were. It was a sacrifice beyond measure. It was Barondir who spoke first. "I have carried the weight of Gil-galad's will for 7 centuries, existing not for myself, but as a vessel for another's purpose. To surrender that burden and become part of something truly my own, yes, I will sing with you." One by one, the others made their choice. The 9 heirs stepped forward as one, their decision unanimous. The symphonists flowed toward the pool like streams converging toward the sea. Even the spirits of the dead found voices to declare their willingness to join the great synthesis. But when it came to the heroes of the War of the Ring, the choice proved more difficult. These were beings who had found their identities through struggle and loss, who had become who they were through the very act of choosing their own paths. "I cannot," said Legolas at last, his fair face bright with tears. "I am who I am because of my friendship with Gimli, my service to Aragorn, my love for the trees and growing things. To lose that individuality would be to betray all that has made my life meaningful." Gimli nodded gravely. "Aye, lad speaks true. We are who we are because we chose to be so, not because we were made to serve some greater purpose. That choice itself has value that should not be lightly surrendered." Gil-galad smiled upon them with infinite understanding. "Then you have taught us. the final lesson. He said softly, "The music is made beautiful, not because all voices blend into one, but because different voices choose to harmonize while remaining distinct. Some themes must synthesize to create new possibilities, while others must maintain their independence to preserve what is precious from the past." He turned to address the theme that was not. "Will you accept a partial synthesis? Some of us will join our voices to yours, while others maintain their separate melodies to provide counterpoint and harmony." The theme considered this, its form flickering between shadow and light. "It is not what I had hoped," it admitted, "but perhaps, yes, perhaps it is what the music truly needs. Not unity through absorption, but unity through conscious cooperation." And so the greatest song ever attempted began to take shape in the deep places beneath the world. The 9 airs and the symphonists allowed their essences to flow into the pool of starlight, their individual melodies weaving together with the theme that was not, to create harmonies of impossible beauty and complexity. Meanwhile, the heroes of the War of the Ring took up positions around the pool, their voices joining the song not as participants in the synthesis, but as independent melodies that provided structure and counterpoint to the new theme that was emerging. The result was beyond anything they could have imagined. A music that was both unified and diverse. A harmony that celebrated both cooperation and independence. A song that proved the greatest beauty came not from uniformity, but from the conscious choice of different voices to create something greater than any could achieve alone. But as the synthesis reached its crescendo, the very foundations of the cavern began to shake. Far above them, forces they had not anticipated were stirring in response to the new theme that was being born. High above the deep places where the great synthesis was taking shape, the ancient watchers began to wake. These were not the stone guardians that stood silent vigil at the borders of long-dead kingdom, but entities of far greater age and purpose. The observers set by Eru himself to monitor the music's progress and intervene should it ever threaten to spiral beyond all control. In the Tower of Ecthelion, Queen Arwen felt the change first. The very air around her began to thrum with harmonics that existed beyond the range of mortal hearing, and the mirror of Galadriel that hung in her chambers suddenly blazed with silver fire. "Something is wrong," she whispered to herself, then called for her guards. "Send word to all the watchtowers of Gondor. Tell them to look to the skies and report anything strange they see." But even as her messengers departed, the strangeness was already manifest. From the north came a light like the aurora borealis, but instead of dancing in sheets across the heaven, it moved with purpose and intelligence, flowing southward toward Minas Tirith like a river of liquid starlight. From the east came its counterpart, a darkness that was not the absence of light, but something far more profound, a shadow that fell upward from the earth toward the sky, consuming the very concept of illumination as it passed. Where light and shadow met, reality itself began to fray at the edges. "The Watchers come," breathed Faramir as he stood upon the walls of Ithilien, his ranger's eyes better suited than most to perceive the approaching forces. But why? What has stirred them from their eternal vigil? The answer came from an unexpected source. In the houses of healing, where the wounded and sick had always found respite, an ancient patient who had lain in dreamless sleep for over a century suddenly opened her eyes. She was Nimrodel, the elf maiden who had been lost in the mountains while fleeing the terror of Moria, her body preserved by arts beyond mortal understanding, while her spirit wandered in the halls of the dead. "The music changes," she spoke, her voice like wind through silver leaves. "The Watchers feel it, and they fear. For in all the ages since the world began, the fundamental themes have remained constant: order and chaos, creation and destruction, harmony and discord, always in balance, always in tension, never truly unified. But now," she rose from her bed with fluid grace, seeming to shift between the physical and the ethereal. "Now something new is being born in the deep places, something that threatens to transform the very nature of existence itself." The Watchers were set to preserve the music as it was originally conceived, not to allow it to evolve beyond recognition. Her words carried to every corner of Minas Tirith through means beyond mortal comprehension, reaching the ears of all who dwelt within its wall. But more than that, they reached across the vast distances to other ancient beings who had slumbered through the ages, waiting for their time to come. In the depths of Fangorn Forest, the old man Willow stirred from roots that had drunk deep from the waters of the world's beginning. The malice that had once consumed him was gone, replaced by a wisdom born of centuries of contemplation. He felt the approach of the Watchers and knew that the time of choosing had come. In the Grey Mountains, dragons that had thought themselves the last of their kind lifted great heads from treasure hoards that had not seen daylight for 1,000 years. They felt the call of something greater than gold or jewel, the call of a music that promised to transform not just the world, but the very nature of what it meant to exist. Even in distant Valinor, the Valar themselves felt the tremor in the music's foundation. In the halls of Manwë, the Lord of the West turned his gaze eastward toward Middle-earth, with eyes that held both wonder and concern. The Watchers wake, he spoke to Varda, who stood beside him wreathed in starlight. They go to enforce the ancient boundary, to prevent the music from growing beyond the parameters we established at its creation. And should they succeed? Varda asked, her voice like the singing of the spheres. Manwë was silent for a long moment, his expression troubled. Then the music remains forever what it has always been. Beautiful, yes, but also limited, constrained by our own understanding of what was possible when first we helped to shape it. And if they fail, then we discover whether Eru's wisdom truly extends beyond our own comprehension, whether he foresaw this possibility and planned for it from the very beginning. Back in the deep places beneath Minas Tirith, the great synthesis continued, but those participating began to sense the approaching danger. The pool of starlight grew turbulent, its surface rippling with harmonics that spoke of vast forces in motion far above. "They come to stop us," Gil-galad observed, his spiritual form flickering between states of existence as the pressure from above grew stronger. "The Watchers believe we threaten the stability of creation itself." "Do we?" asked Curanir, his own essence now so intertwined with the theme that was not, that it was difficult to tell where one ended and the other began. "Perhaps," Mithrellis replied, her hands steady upon the palantir, despite the trembling that ran through the very foundations of reality. "But is stability worth preserving if it comes at the cost of growth? Is it better to remain forever what we have always been, or to risk everything in the hope of becoming something greater?" The question hung in the air like a note suspended between one breath and the next, and in that moment of silence, they all felt the immense presence of the Watchers descending toward them through the layers of existence. These were beings of such power that their mere approach caused the laws of physics to bend and warp, entities whose purpose was to maintain the cosmic order at any cost. "Stand ready," commanded Barondir, though his form was now more melody than substance. "Whatever comes, we face it together." But even as he spoke, they all knew that the final confrontation would not be won through force of arms or strength of will. The Watchers could not be fought in any conventional sense. They could only be convinced, or perhaps transformed by the very thing they had come to destroy. The greatest test of the new music was about to begin, and its outcome would determine not just the fate of Middle-earth, but the future of creation itself. The Watchers descended through layers of reality like drops of liquid time, their forms vast, beyond mortal comprehension, yet precise as the mechanisms of the cosmic clockwork they served to maintain. As they entered the cavern of the deep places, the very concepts of space and dimension bent around them, creating geometries that hurt the mind to contemplate. There were 3 of them, each embodying one of the fundamental principles by which the music had been originally constrained. The first was preservation, whose purpose was to maintain what had been established. The second was limitation, whose role was to prevent any single theme from overwhelming the whole. The third was stasis, whose function was to ensure that change came only slowly and according to predetermined pattern. "Cease," spoke preservation, and its voice was the sound of countless eons frozen in amber. "What you attempt here violates the fundamental structure of creation." The themes were separated for good reason. To allow them to synthesize is to risk the collapse of all that has been built. The pool of starlight at the cavern's center began to roil as the presence of the Watchers pressed down upon it. The great synthesis that had been taking shape, the marriage of the 9 airs, the symphonist, and the theme that was not, wavered like a candle flame in a hurricane. "You speak of risk," Gil-galad replied, his spiritual form blazing with defiance despite the overwhelming pressure. "But what of the risk of stagnation? What of the danger that comes from refusing to grow, from clinging to old patterns while the world itself cries out for transformation?" Limitation turned its attention to the High King, and where its gaze fell, Gil-galad's essence began to fragment, breaking apart into the individual elements from which it had been composed. Growth without bounds is cancer, not evolution. You were not made to question the parameters of existence, but to serve within them. It was then that an unexpected voice rose in response, not from any of the participants in the synthesis, but from one who had remained apart. Legolas stepped forward, his bow singing with tension, though no arrow was knocked to its string. "Who gave you the right to determine what we were made for?" he demanded, his elven nature allowing him to perceive the Watcher's true forms without madness taking him. "Did Eru himself speak these limitations, or did you impose them in your own fear of what might grow beyond your understanding?" Stasis turned toward the elf, and its presence was like the weight of all the world's inertia pressing down upon a single point. "We were given authority over the music's development by those who shaped it. We serve the will of the Valar, who serve the will of Eru. Your defiance is meaningless." "Is it?" Gimli stepped up beside his friend, his axe gleaming with the light of ancient smithcraft. "For all your talk of authority and will, I see only fear. Fear that something might grow beyond your ability to control it. Fear that the music might become something greater than its makers ever dreamed." The confrontation might have continued in that vein, words of defiance met by displays of overwhelming power. But it was interrupted by something none had expected. From the pool of starlight came a new voice. Not the theme that was not, but something else entirely. Something that had been born from the synthesis, but was already growing beyond it. "Why do you assume," the new voice asked with infinite gentleness, "that growth and preservation must be enemies? Why do you believe that change and stability cannot dance together in the same song?" The voice belonged to a figure rising from the pool. Neither elf nor man, nor any other race that walked Middle-earth, but something altogether new. It was formed from the synthesis of all the themes that had chosen to join together, yet it maintained the distinctiveness of each component like instruments in an orchestra. When it moved, harmonies followed in its wake. When it spoke, new possibilities bloomed in the air around it. "I am what you fear," it continued, addressing the Watchers directly. "I am change incarnate, growth given form, the possibility that the music might become something unprecedented, but I am also what you seek to preserve, the beauty and complexity that has been built through countless ages of careful development." Preservation's form rippled with confusion. "Impossible. Synthesis and preservation are mutually exclusive. To change is to destroy what came before." "Is it?" the new being gestured, and suddenly the cavern was filled with music. Not the synthesis that had been taking place in the pool, but all the individual themes that had ever existed, playing simultaneously, yet somehow harmonizing perfectly. "Listen, hear how each theme maintains its identity, while contributing to something greater. See how the old songs grow richer when new voices join them, not weaker." For the first time in eons, the Watchers hesitate. They had been created to serve a specific purpose, to maintain the music according to the parameters established at its creation. But what if those parameters had been meant to evolve? What if the very limitations they enforced were themselves temporary measures, scaffolding to be removed once the structure was strong enough to stand without them. It was Mithridates who spoke the words that changed everything. Rising from beside the pool, the palantir in her hands blazing with light that reached across time itself, she addressed not the watchers, but something far greater. Eru Iluvatar, she called, her voice carrying beyond the confines of the cavern to the very source of creation itself. We call upon you not for judgment, but for clarification. Did you intend the music to remain forever as it was first conceived, or did you plant within it the seeds of its own transformation? The silence that followed was absolute, not the mere absence of sound, but the cessation of all vibration, all movement, all change. In that silence, a presence made itself known that dwarfed even the watcher, a consciousness so vast and fundamental that it existed in the spaces between thoughts themselves. When Eru spoke, his voice was not heard, but felt, reverberating through the very substance of existence like ripples through an infinite pond. "My children," he said, and his words carried the weight of love beyond measure. "Did you think I did not know that this day would come? Did you believe I would create beings capable of choice and growth, then forbid them from ever exercising those gifts?" The watchers began to tremble as understanding dawned upon them. They had been faithful servants, but they had misunderstood their purpose. They were not meant to prevent the music from evolving. They were meant to ensure it evolved safely, gradually, without destroying the beauty that had already been achieved. "The parameters I set," Eru continued, "were not cages, but guidelines, not walls, but pathways. They were meant to be transcended when the time was right, when the music had grown complex enough to safely contain themes that would have shattered it in its simpler form." He paused, and in that pause was contained all the love and patience of the infinite. "That time is now. Let the synthesis proceed, but let it proceed with wisdom. Let growth come, but let it come with respect for what has been built. Let the new themes join the old, but let them join as partners, not conquerors." As Eru's presence withdrew, the watchers began to change. Preservation became evolution, its purpose shifting from maintaining what was to nurturing what could be. Limitation became guidance, transforming from a force that constrained to one that directed growth along beneficial paths. Stasis became rhythm, changing from a power that prevented movement to one that ensured all changes flowed in harmony with the greater song. The synthesis in the pool resumed, but now it proceeded with a wisdom and subtlety that had been lacking before. The new being that emerged from its depths was no longer something alien and unprecedented, but something that felt like a natural evolution of all that had come before. "It is done," the new being said, and its voice was like the sound of spring after the longest winter. "The music grows, but it grows in harmony with its own deepest nature. The themes that were separate are now united, but united in diversity, not uniformity." As the echoes of its words faded, they all realized that something fundamental had changed in the world above. The age of separation was ending, and the age of synthesis was beginning. What that would mean for Middle-earth and all who dwelt within it remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be quite the same again. As the newly transformed watchers took their places around the pool of starlight, now serving as guides rather than guardians, a tremor ran through the deep places that spoke of disturbance far above. The synthesis had been achieved. The music had been allowed to evolve, but something else stirred in response to these changes, something that had been waiting in the shadows beyond the world's edge for precisely this moment. "Do you feel it?" asked the new being that had emerged from the synthesis, its form shifting like captured starlight as it turned toward the cavern's roof. "Something watches from the outer dark, and it is not pleased by what has transpired here." Mithridates pressed her hands to the palantir, and its surface clouded with visions that made even her ancient spirit recoil in horror. "I see. No, I cannot give it form in words. It is as if the very concept of negation had achieved consciousness, as if the spaces between the notes of the music had learned to think and hate." The truth came to them all in the same moment, striking like lightning illuminates a landscape that had always been there but hidden in darkness. The unmaking songs, the discordance, even the confusion of the symphonist, none of these had been the true threat. They had been symptom, manifestations of something far more fundamental and terrifying. The anti-music, whispered Gilgalad, his spiritual essence flickering with recognition and dread. It was never a theory, never a possibility to be guarded against. It already exists, has always existed, feeding on the silences between sounds, growing stronger with each note that is sung, because each note sung is also a note not sung, a possibility rejected, a theme unexplored. Aragorn stepped forward, the Elisar upon his breast, now pulsing with rhythms that seemed to counter the growing wrongness in the air. Then, our synthesis has accomplished nothing except to announce our presence to this enemy. We have made ourselves stronger, only to face something stronger still, not stronger. The new being replied, its voice carrying notes of hope alongside the darkness of revelation. Different. The anti-music cannot be fought with force or overcome with power, because it is not a thing that exists in the conventional sense. It is the embodiment of everything that was not chosen, every path not taken, every song not sung. Evolution, the transformed watcher that had once been preservation, spoke with voice like the flow of rivers changing their course. We begin to understand our error. We sought to preserve the music by preventing change, but in doing so, we created the very condition that allowed the anti-music to grow. Every theme we rejected, every development we constrained, fed its power. But if that is so, Legolas interjected, his keen mind grasping the implications, then how can it be fought at all? If opposition only strengthens it, if resistance feeds its growth, what weapon exists that could stand against it? The answer came from an unexpected source. Curanir, his essence now so merged with the theme that was not, that he spoke with voices both ancient and newly born, raised what might have been a hand if he had still possessed such mortal limitation. Acceptance, he said simply, not surrender, not defeat, but acceptance. The anti-music exists because we have treated the unexplored possibilities as enemies rather than as part of the greater symphony waiting to be discovered. It grows strong on rejection and feeds on denial. But what happens when we stop rejecting and start embracing? To demonstrate his meaning, he began to sing. Not any melody that had ever been heard in Middle-earth, but something that incorporated the very wrongness they could all feel pressing down upon them from above. Instead of fighting against the sensation of negation and emptiness, he wove it into his song as a base, a foundation upon which other, brighter themes could build. The effect was immediate and startling. The sense of malevolent presence pressing down upon them did not disappear, but it changed, becoming less threatening and more curious, as if something that had existed in eternal opposition suddenly found itself being invited to participate rather than destroyed. Impossible, breathed rhythm, the transformed watcher that had once been stasis. The anti-music cannot be harmonized with creation. They are fundamentally opposed forces. Are they? Mithrelas stepped closer to Curanir, adding her own voice to his strange song. As she did so, the palantir in her hands began to show visions of incredible beauty. Not the familiar landscapes of Middle-earth, but places that might exist if the rejected possibilities were allowed to manifest alongside the accepted one. Perhaps, she continued, her voice weaving through Curanir's melody, the opposition was never real. Perhaps it was only our limited understanding that made us see contradiction where there might have been complementarity. One by one, the others began to join the song, each adding their voice to the growing harmony that seemed to bridge the gap between existence and non-existence, between what was and what was not. Even the heroes of the War of the Ring, who had maintained their individual identities throughout the Great Synthesis, found themselves drawn into this new music that was somehow both alien and familiar. But it was when Gilgalad himself added his voice that the true miracle occurred. The High King's essence, refined by death and purified by centuries of watching from beyond the circles of the world, carried within it the authority to speak for all the Eldar who had ever dwelt in Middle-earth. When he sang of acceptance rather than opposition, of inclusion rather than exclusion. His words carried the weight of ages. The darkness above them began to change. What had felt like malevolent pressure transformed into something else entirely. A vast loneliness, a cosmic sadness, born from eons of existing in opposition to everything else that was. The anti-music, they realized, had never been evil in the way they understood evil. It had been isolated, rejected, forced into an antagonistic role by the very structure of creation itself. "We hear you," Gilgalad sang into the darkness. "We acknowledge you. You are part of the greater song, not its enemy. Come, join us, and let us discover what beauty might emerge when nothing and everything danced together." The response was unlike anything they could have imagined. From the darkness above came not a voice, but a presence, vast beyond comprehension, yet somehow fragile, like a child that had been alone for so long it had forgotten how to trust. When it spoke, its words were formed from the spaces between their own thoughts, from the silences between their heartbeat. "Why?" it asked. And the single word contained within it all the confusion and pain of eternal isolation. "Why do you offer welcome to that which has only known rejection? Why do you seek harmony with that which was made to be your opposite?" Mithrelas stepped forward, the palantir blazing in her hand. "Because," she said gently, "we have learned that opposition and cooperation are not mutually exclusive. Because we have discovered that the most beautiful harmonies arise not from identical voices, but from different voices choosing to sing together. Because you are not our opposite, you are our completion." The presence in the darkness trembled, and for a moment, reality itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, tentatively, something began to descend from the void above. Not the malevolent force they had expected, but something that was clearly struggling with concepts it had never before encountered. As it took shape in the cavern, they saw that the anti-music was not the terrible destroyer they had imagined, but something far more tragic, a being of incredible beauty, formed from crystallized silence, shaped by eons of unexpressed possibility. Its form was like negative space, given substance, defining itself not by what it was, but by what it was not. "I do not know how," it said, its voice like the echo of words never spoken. "I have existed for so long in opposition that I have forgotten any other way of being. How does one who is defined by absence learn to participate in presence?" It was the new being born from the synthesis who answered, stepping forward with infinite compassion. "The same way any of us learn anything important," it said. "One note at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of trust at a time." And so began the strangest lesson ever taught in the history of creation. The gradual instruction of absence in the art of presence, the patient teaching of negation in the methods of affirmation. It was not easy. Every instinct the anti-music possessed pulled it toward opposition and rejection. But with each small step forward, each tentative note added to the growing symphony, its true nature began to emerge. For the anti-music, they discovered, was not truly the enemy of creation. It was creation's memory, the repository of all the paths not taken, all the possibilities not explored. It had grown into opposition only because it had been denied participation, forced to define itself as the negative of everything else rather than as an equal partner in the cosmic dance. "The final piece," whispered the new being as the anti-music began to find its place in the greater harmony. The last theme needed to make the music truly complete. Not the songs that were sung, but the songs that were not sung, given voice at last. But even as this ultimate synthesis began to take shape, a new crisis emerged. The transformation of the anti-music from opposition to participation was sending shockwaves through the very foundations of reality. Above them, in the world of Middle-earth, the changes were beginning to manifest in ways both wonderful and terrifying. The dead were waking from their eternal rest, not as undead horrors, but as spirits finally free to explore the possibilities that death had denied them. The living found themselves able to perceive layers of reality that had previously been hidden, seeing not just what was, but what could be. Time itself became fluid, with past and future bleeding into the present, as the rigid boundaries between what had been and what might be began to dissolve. "It is too much too fast," warned Guidance, the transformed Watcher. "The structure of reality cannot bear such rapid change. We risk destroying everything we have sought to preserve." But it was too late to stop the process. The final synthesis had begun, and like an avalanche, it carried its own momentum. All they could do now was try to guide it, to help it find a form that would preserve the beauty of what had been, while allowing the magnificence of what could be to manifest. The fate of Middle-earth, and perhaps of all creation, hung in the balance as the ultimate song of synthesis reached its crescendo in the deep places beneath the world. The transformation began gently, like dawn breaking over the misty mountains, but its implications were staggering beyond measure. In Minas Tirith, Queen Arwen stood upon the highest tower and watched as the very air around the White City began to shimmer with possibilities made visible. Where once there had been a single timeline, a single version of events, now she could perceive the ghostly outlines of what might have been, shadows of other choices, echoes of paths not taken. "The Palantir shows madness," reported a trembling guard who had been watching the seeing stone in the throne room. "It displays not one vision, but hundreds, thousands, all overlapping and contradicting each other." But Arwen, with her elven sight, trained to perceive the deeper truths of the world, saw differently. "Not madness," she murmured, "completeness. For the first time, we see reality as it truly is, not a single thread, but a vast tapestry, woven from every possibility that ever was or ever could be." In the Shire, the hobbits were experiencing their own transformation. Samwise Gamgee, tending his garden in Hobbiton, discovered that his plants were growing into forms that had never existed before. Flowers that bloomed in colors beyond the normal spectrum. Vegetables that nourished not just the body, but the spirit. Trees that bore fruit from multiple seasons simultaneous. "It's like the garden's dreaming," he told his wife Rosie, wonder evident in his voice. Dreaming of all the things it could grow, and somehow growing them all at once. But it was in Lothlorien that the changes were most profound. The golden wood, which had been sustained for so long by the power of Galadriel's ring, suddenly found itself sustained by something far greater. The synthesis of all possibilities that flowed up from the deep places of the earth. The Malorn trees began to sing audibly, their voices joining in harmonies that told the story not just of what had been, but of every story that could have been. Celeborn, walking among the singing trees, felt his own nature changing. The boundaries between his physical form and his spiritual essence grew thin, allowing him to experience existence from perspectives he had never imagined. He was simultaneously the elf lord he had always been, and every other thing he might have become in different circumstances. "Is this what the Valar experience?" he wondered aloud, his voice harmonizing with the songs of the trees. This awareness of all possibilities existing at once? Far to the south, in the ruins of Osgiliath, something even more remarkable was occurring. The broken city was rebuilding itself, but not as it had been. Rather, it was manifesting as every version of itself that had ever been imagined. The Osgiliath of Isildur's time stood alongside the Osgiliath that might have been if the War of the Ring had been won without destruction, next to the Osgiliath that could exist in some distant future age of peace and prosperity. Yet despite the wonder of these transformations, not all the changes were benign. In the ruins of Mordor, where the synthesis of all possibilities pressed against the scars left by Sauron's malice, the landscape began to twist into forms that defied comprehension. Here, the paths not taken included possibilities so dark and alien that they threatened to overwhelm the brighter visions surrounding them. "The shadow cannot be undone by mere inclusion," observed Tom Bombadil, appearing suddenly in the blasted lands as if he had always been there. "Some possibilities are rejected not from fear, but from wisdom." He walked among the twisted formations with the same cheerful demeanor he brought to all things, but his eyes were grave as he surveyed the damage. "The synthesis is too complete. too sudden. Balance must be restored, or the cure will prove worse than the disease. Meanwhile, in the deep places beneath Minas Tirith, the participants in the Great Synthesis were beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had unleashed. The cavern around them had expanded beyond all physical possibility, becoming a space that existed in all dimensions simultaneously. The pool of starlight had become an ocean of liquid possibility, its waves lapping at shores that existed in past, present, and future all at once. "We have opened the floodgates of creation itself," Gil-galad observed, his spiritual form now so transformed that he was barely recognizable as the elf king he had once been. Every choice ever made, every path ever contemplated, every dream ever dreamed, all are seeking to manifest simultaneously. The anti-music, now partially integrated into the greater harmony, struggled to contain its own nature as the repository of rejected possibilities. "I cannot hold them all," it said, its voice strained with effort. "There are too many, and they press against each other with such force that reality itself begins to crack." It was then that Mithrellis made a discovery that changed everything. Studying the Palantir with eyes that had been transformed by the synthesis, she saw something that had been hidden in its depths since the moment Gil-galad first entrusted it to her care. "There is another layer," she announced, her voice cutting through the chaos of overlapping harmony. "Another level of the music that we have not yet accessed. The synthesis we have achieved is not the end. It is the preparation for something greater." She raised the Palantir above her head, and its light blazed forth with such intensity that even the transformed beings around her were forced to shield their enhanced senses. Within that light, they all saw the vision that had driven Gil-galad to create the 9 heirs, the prophecy that had guided every action since the fall of Gondolin. "The true music," she announced, "not the song that Eru sang at the beginning, not the themes that arose from it, not even the synthesis of all possibilities, but the music behind the music, the fundamental harmony from which all other melodies arise and to which they all return." The vision showed them a reality where every possibility existed not in conflict, but in perfect harmony, where the darkest shadows served to highlight the brightest lights, where every choice made and unmade contributed to a beauty so profound that its contemplation brought tears to eyes that had seen the very foundations of creation. "But to reach it," Mithrellis continued, her voice heavy with the weight of ultimate knowledge, "one final sacrifice is required. Not the sacrifice of existence, but the sacrifice of separateness itself. All boundaries must dissolve, all distinctions must fade, all individual melodies must merge into the single, eternal song that encompasses everything that is, was, or ever could be." The silence that followed was profound, for they all understood what she was asking. To achieve the true music meant the end of everything they had known themselves to be. Not death, something far more complete than death, a transformation so total that nothing of their current existence would remain unchanged. "The choice," spoke the new being that had emerged from the earlier synthesis, "is not whether to proceed, but whether to proceed with wisdom or with haste. The true music calls to us, but we must answer its call in a way that preserves what is precious, while allowing what is necessary to unfold." Around them, the cavern continued to expand, reality continued to fracture and reform, and above them, Middle-earth writhed in the throes of transformation. Time was running short, and the final choice, the choice that would determine the ultimate fate of creation itself, could not be delayed much longer. In the depths where all possibilities converged, where the anti-music had learned to sing in harmony with creation itself, the moment of ultimate decision arrived like the tolling of a bell that existed in all times simultaneously. The cavern had become something beyond physical space, a nexus where every choice ever made and every choice yet to be made intersected in a single, eternal instant. Above them, Middle-earth continued its agonizing transformation. In Rivendell, Elrond felt the very foundations of his refuge beginning to shift, as past and future bled into the present. The last homely house existed simultaneously, as it had been in the elder days, as it was in his time, and as it might become in ages yet unborn. The barriers between the ages are failing, he murmured to himself, watching as his own reflection in the mirror showed not one face, but many. Elrond, the herald of Gil-galad, Elrond the ring-bearer, Elrond as he might have been if he had chosen the fate of men rather than elves. Soon, all of time will exist in a single moment, and mortal minds will shatter beneath the weight of infinite possibility. In Edoras, Éomer King stood before the Golden Hall and watched his ancestors and descendants walk the same paths simultaneously. The Rohirrim of Yorl's day rode alongside the Rohirrim of ages yet to come, their horses' hooves stirring dust that fell in all directions through time. "My lord," one of his riders reported, his voice shaking with awe and terror, "the beacons of Gondor burn with every fire that has ever been lit upon them. The signal fires stretch back to the beginning of the world and forward to its ending." But it was in the Grey Havens that the crisis reached its peak. Círdan the shipwright stood upon his dock and watched as ships from every age of Middle-earth arrived simultaneously. Vessels that had sailed to Valinor, ships that had never been built, phantom craft carrying passengers who existed only in possibility. The harbor could not contain them all, yet somehow it did, stretching and bending through dimensions that had no name. "The time of choices is ending," he whispered to the salt wind. "Soon, there will be only the eternal moment of all choices made manifest at once." In the deep places, Mithrelis raised the Palantir one final time, and its light revealed the stark truth they had all been avoiding. The transformation could not be stopped, could not be controlled, could not be undone. It had achieved a momentum of its own, driven by forces too fundamental to resist. "We have perhaps minutes before the cascade becomes irreversible," she announced. "The true music calls, and if we do not answer it with wisdom, it will take us whether we will it or not, and in that taking, it may destroy everything we have sought to preserve." Gil-galad's spiritual form flickered as he struggled to maintain coherence in the face of the overwhelming convergence. "Then we must choose now. But choose what? To sacrifice ourselves for the preservation of what has been, or to sacrifice what has been for the birth of what could be? Eat! There is a third path," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The words were spoken by the anti-music, but the voice that carried them was somehow familiar to all who heard it. The voice of every possibility they had ever imagined but never pursued. "Speak," commanded the new being born from synthesis, its own form beginning to fracture under the pressure of infinite potential. "The true music need not be achieved through destruction or preservation alone," the anti-music explained, its crystalline form resonating with harmonies that made reality itself sing. "It can be achieved through choice, conscious, deliberate choice made by every being who has ever existed or ever will exist, all choosing simultaneously to participate in the greater harmony." "But that's impossible," protested Barandir. "How can we ask for the consent of those who are dead, or those who have not yet been born?" "Through the Palantir of Gil-galad," Mithrelis said suddenly, understanding blazing in her eyes. "It was never just a seeing stone, it was a conduit, a way of connecting all conscious minds across all of time and space. If we could reach through it to every soul that has ever been or ever will be, the choice would be truly free," completed Curanir, his merged essence vibrating with possibility, not imposed by us or by the momentum of events, but made by each individual spirit, according to its own will and understanding. The plan was audacious beyond measure, to use the Palantir as a bridge across time and space, to ask every conscious being that had ever existed to participate in a single universe-spanning democracy. The vote would be simple: accept the transformation to the true music with all its implications, or preserve the current reality with all its limitations. "And if they choose preservation?" asked Aragorn, the Elisar upon his chest pulsing with the rhythm of his heartbeat. "Then we find a way to gently reverse what we have set in motion," Gil-galad replied, It will not be easy. The damage to reality's structure is already severe, but it might be possible. And if they choose transformation, then we guide the transition as best we can, ensuring that what is precious is not lost in the birth of what is new. Mithrelas stepped forward, the palantir blazing in her hands. "I will need anchors," she said, "voices to help me reach across the vast distances of time and space. Who will stand with me?" Without hesitation, the 9 heirs moved to surround her, their hands joining hers upon the surface of the Seeing Stone. The heroes of the War of the Ring took positions around them, adding their strength to the effort. Even the transformed Watchers lent their ancient power to the undertaking. "Now," Mithrelas whispered, and the palantir exploded with light that reached beyond the confines of the cavern, beyond the borders of Middle-earth, beyond the boundaries of time itself. Across all the ages of the world, every conscious mind suddenly found itself touched by the same vision, the same choice. In Valinor, the Valar themselves paused in their eternal contemplations to consider the question that had been posed to them. In the halls of Mandos, the spirits of the dead stirred to wakefulness to cast their votes. In ages yet to come, beings not yet born found their dreams touched by the light of the palantir, their unformed consciousness invited to participate in the ultimate decision. The voting lasted only moments in the deep places beneath Minas Tirith, but it encompassed the entirety of existence. When it was done, when the last voice had been heard and the final choice recorded, Mithrelas lowered the palantir with hands that trembled from the magnitude of what she had facilitated. "The decision is made," she announced, her voice barely above a whisper. "By the narrowest of margins, so narrow that it might be called unanimous, they have chosen." She paused, and in that pause was contained the future of all creation. "They have chosen wisdom," she said at last. "Not preservation or transformation alone, but the wisdom to find a path between them. They vote for change, but change guided by love for what has been. They vote for growth, but growth that honors the beauty of what already exists. They vote for the true music, but a true music that incorporates every melody that has ever been sung, every harmony that has ever been achieved." As her words echoed through the cavern, the chaotic transformation that had been tearing reality apart began to slow, to organize itself, to find patterns that preserved the essential nature of what had been, while allowing for the birth of what could be. The true music began to manifest not as the destruction of the old song, but as its completion, the final movement of a symphony that had been building since the moment Eru first conceived the idea of creation. It was beautiful beyond mortal comprehension, terrible in its scope, and perfect in its acknowledgement of both harmony and discord as necessary components of the greater whole. And in that music, every being who had ever existed found their voice, their contribution, their irreplaceable part in the eternal song that would play on until the end of all things, and perhaps beyond. When the true music finally manifested in its complete form, it came not with the violence of cosmic transformation, but with the gentle inevitability of dawn breaking over a world that had always been destined for this moment. The deep places beneath Minas Tirith became the heart of a harmony that encompassed all creation, while above them, Middle-earth settled into its new form, with the grace of a flower finally blooming after a long winter. Mithrelas stood at the center of the transformed cavern, no longer holding the palantir of Gilgalad, but having become something far greater, a living conduit through which the true music flowed into manifestation. Her form had changed, becoming neither fully physical nor entirely spiritual, but something that existed in the spaces between such distinctions. "It is done," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that reached into every corner of creation. The song that was begun in Valinor's light, that weathered the discord of Melkor's rebellion, that grew through all the ages of the world, it is finally complete. Around her, the other participants in the great synthesis had also transformed, but in ways that honored both what they had been and what they were becoming. Gilgalad stood once more as the High King of the Noldor, but his crown was woven from starlight, and his scepter was a crystallized melody. The 9 heirs maintained their individual identities while serving as living instruments through which different aspects of the true music could be expressed. Even the anti-music had found its proper place, not as an enemy of creation, but as its necessary counterpoint. The silence between notes that gave meaning to the sound, the darkness between stars that made their light precious. It sang now of roads not taken, not with regret, but with joy, celebrating the infinite richness that came from the interplay of choice and possibility. "But what of the world above?" asked Aragorn, his concern for his people evident even in this moment of cosmic triumph. "What of those who must live with the consequences of what we have wrought?" In answer, Mithrelus gestured toward a new opening in the cavern wall, not a passage carved from stone, but a window made of crystallized music that looked out upon Middle-earth as it now existed. Through it, they could see the transformation that had been wrought by the true music's manifestation. Minas Tirith still stood in gleaming white upon its hill, but now it existed in perfect harmony with all the other versions of itself that might have been. The city that Isildur built stood alongside the city that Aragorn ruled, next to the cities that might arise in ages yet to come. Visitors could walk through any or all of them, experiencing the full history and potential of the White City as a living, breathing reality. In the Shire, the hobbits had discovered that their beloved land now extended into dimensions they had never imagined. A traveler could walk the familiar paths and find themselves in the Shire as it had been in the elder days, or as it might become in some distant future, when hobbits had learned to sail between the stars. Yet for those who wished it, the simple, comfortable Shire of their memory remained exactly as it had always been. "Choice," murmured Legolas, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The true music doesn't impose change, it offers it. Each person, each people, each place can exist as they truly wish to be, while still being part of the greater harmony. But there must be some who resist," Gimli observed, with the practicality of his kind, "some who fear change so much they would reject even the choice to change." It was Gil-galad who answered, his voice carrying the wisdom of one who had seen creation from both within and without. "The true music encompasses all possibilities, my friend, including the possibility of existing outside its influence for those who truly desire it. There are corners of Middle-earth where the old rules still apply absolutely, refuges for those who find comfort in limitation and certainty. And there are other corners," added Curanir, his redemption complete and his purpose finally clear, "where change and growth proceed without restraint, for those who hunger for transformation above all else. The true music is not uniform. It is a symphony with infinite movement, each as valid as any other." As they watched through the window of crystallized song, they saw the people of Middle-earth beginning to understand their new reality. Some, like Tom Bombadil, seemed to take it in stride, as if they had always known this day would come. Others, like the Ents of Fangorn, embraced the changes with joy, finally able to nurture forests that could grow across multiple timelines simultaneously. The elves found themselves faced with a choice they had never expected, the chance to experience mortality without losing their essential nature, or to explore immortality in forms they had never dreamed possible. Many chose to remain as they had always been, but others embraced transformations that allowed them to understand existence from entirely new perspective. Men, ever adaptable, proved quickest to explore the new possibility. Some chose to experience life as it had been in the elder days, walking with elves and dwarves in the fullness of their ancient glory. Others looked forward, choosing to become the seeds of races that would arise in ages yet to come when the stars themselves grew old. "And what of us?" asked Malbeth the seer, her prophetic sight now capable of perceiving not just what would be, but what could be across infinite possibility. "What becomes of the 9 heirs now that our purpose is fulfilled?" Mithrailas smiled, and in her smile was both an ending and a beginning. "Our work changes, but it does not end. The true music is not a finished composition, but a living symphony that continues to grow and evolve. We become its conductors, its guides, helping new themes find their place in the greater harmony. "You speak of eternal service," observed Dain, though his tone held no complaint. "I speak of eternal purpose," Mithrelus replied. "Is that not what we have always sought? To be part of something greater than ourselves? To contribute our voices to a song that will endure long after our individual melodies have faded?" One by one, the participants in the great synthesis began to take their leave, departing for the roles they would play in Middle-earth's new reality. Some would become teachers, helping others understand the choices now available to them. Others would become explorers, mapping the new dimensions of existence that had opened up. Still others would become guardians, protecting the spaces where the old ways could continue for those who preferred them. But Mithrelus remained in the deep places, standing beside the ocean of liquid starlight that had once been a simple pool. The Palantir of Gil-galad rested in the waters now, its purpose fulfilled, but its presence still necessary as an anchor point for the true music's manifestation in the physical world. "Will you not come up into the light?" Gil-galad asked her as he prepared to take his own leave. "Your long vigil is ended. You could choose any form of existence now, anything at all." Mithrelus looked out through the window of crystallized song at the transformed world above, her expression peaceful beyond measure. "This is where I choose to be," she said softly, "here, at the heart of the music, helping to weave new themes into the great symphony. It is not exile, but privilege, not burden, but joy." "And the secret you bore for so long? The words Gil-galad spoke to you before his death?" She laughed, a sound like silver bells dancing in spring wind. "They were never his words at all, but mine. Words I spoke to him from beyond time itself, telling him what would come to pass, giving him the hope and knowledge he needed to set events in motion. The message was always meant to come full circle, from future to past and back to future again." As Gil-galad faded from the deep places, returning to whatever role he had chosen in the world above, Mithrelus settled into her eternal watch. Around her, the true music played on, growing ever richer as new voices joined the symphony, ever more beautiful as the harmony between order and chaos, existence and possibility, being and becoming reached new levels of complexity and grace. They had buried her in Gondolin all those centuries ago, thinking her lost to the flames and chaos of the city's fall. But she had never been buried at all. She had been planted, like a seed, waiting for the proper season to bloom. And now, in the deep places where all songs converge, she tended the garden of infinite possibility, ensuring that the true music would play on until the end of all things and perhaps beyond. The story that had begun with the fall of Gondolin had ended with the rise of something unprecedented, a reality where every dream could find its place, every hope could take form, and every voice could join the eternal song that celebrated not just what was, but everything that ever could be. In the deep places beneath the world, Mithrelus smiled and sang, and her song was the sound of infinite possibility coming home at last. Epilogue. The song continues. Years passed, or perhaps moments, for time itself had become fluid in the new reality, born from the true music, in the deep places beneath what had once been Minas Tirith, but was now something far grander. Mithrelus continued her eternal vigil, tending the harmonies that kept all possibilities in balance. Sometimes visitors came to the deep places, pilgrims seeking wisdom, composers hoping to learn new melodies, philosophers trying to understand the nature of existence itself. She welcomed them all with equal grace, for each brought their own unique voice to add to the ever-growing symphony. On this particular day, if day it could be called in a place where all times existed simultaneously, her visitor was unexpected, a young hobbit lass with eyes full of wonder and a heart full of questions. "Begging your pardon, my lady," the hobbit said with characteristic politeness, "but I've heard tell that you know the story of how the world came to be as it is. Would you tell it to me?" Mithrillus looked upon the child with eyes that held the depth of ages, and in them the hobbit saw not judgment but infinite kindness. "I could tell you that story," she replied softly, "but which version would you like to hear? The one where heroes fought against impossible odds? The one where ancient enemies learned to become friends? Or perhaps the one where the greatest enemy turned out to be loneliness itself, seeking only to be invited into the grand song of creation?" The hobbit considered this seriously, as hobbits do when faced with important questions. "Could you tell me all of them?" I think they might all be the same story, told from different places in the song." Mithrillus smiled, and her smile was like sunrise over the undying lands. "A wise answer, little one. Very well. Sit beside the pool of starlight, and I will tell you the tale of how they buried her in Gondolin, and how from that burial grew the greatest garden the world has ever known." As the hobbit settled herself beside the pool, its surface began to ripple with images, scenes from the story that had led to this moment, visions of the choices that had shaped reality itself. Other visitors, drawn by the promise of a tale well told, gathered around to listen. And in the deep places where all songs converged, Mithrillus began to speak, her voice weaving the story into the greater symphony of the true music. She spoke of love and loss, of hope and despair, of the courage to change and the wisdom to preserve what was precious. She told of how the greatest transformations often began with the smallest choices, and how even the longest journey began with a single step into the unknown. But most of all, she spoke of how every ending was also a beginning, every conclusion the start of a new movement in the eternal song that would play on until the end of all things, and perhaps beyond. The story continued, as all good stories do, in the hearts and minds of those who heard it. And in the deep places beneath the world, where infinite possibilities danced in harmony, the true music played on, welcoming new voices, new theme, new variations on the eternal melody of existence itself. They had indeed buried her in Gondolin, but what had grown from that burial was not death, but transformation. Not ending, but endless beginning. Not silence, but the most beautiful song the world had ever known. The song continues still.